This is episode 749 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, it's been a very eventful week since we last talked here in New Mexico and, quite frankly, across the entire country, but specifically on New Mexico's side of things, there was a special session lasting 2 days, last Wednesday and Thursday. And before we dive into what actually happened during the special session, there's a few kind of, not housekeeping, but, few things to talk about the overall session. Now, one thing that we heard and we discussed last week is that Republicans were widely reported in the media as not having access to the bills that were being discussed in Santa Fe in the legislative session. I myself was in the room in the House Health Committee when the Republicans at the beginning of the hearing on Wednesday were receiving copies of said legislation, and that I don't know if there are specific rules in New Mexico's open meetings laws, but that is not the way to run the legislature.
Yes, that is very interesting, Paul, that you would withhold the legislation. If the Democrats maintain discipline in their voting, they don't need a Republican to do anything. So that's clear. But again, if nothing else, man, that's just poor form not to give that out. And then that is against the background of how good New Mexico is reaching across the aisle on a national level. Our governor is, and it's like to not give that to the R's. Not a good look at a minimum.
Yeah, and for starters, Republicans don't have the votes to stop any of this stuff. Anything that the Democrats wanted to do during a special session. So what's the point there? And I was also in the room, and my understanding is that all of the Democrat chairs were in this mode, but Liz Thompson, she of the uber progressiveness and demeanor that is just, shall we say, not exactly a ray of sunshine there.
Yeah, sometimes condescension personified.
Yes. She was very much in the mode of moving the process along. You could tell that the Democrats were operating on a bit of a timeline, and they wanted to clear through the debate, discussion, any questions being asked. It was not to be done during the special session. The bills were the bills, and they were going to move them through as quickly as humanly possible, which wound up being 2 days, and just not allowing really a lot of dissent or discussion. And that's unfortunate as well, because this is a state that has seen legislative oopsies over the years where I know specifically the most recent one I can remember was when they misdesignated the amount of alcohol that was going to be taxed and at what rate. And that basically killed that bill. Now, don't get me wrong, Rio Grande Foundation's fully supportive of bad legislative drafting on those things that wind up with the bill dying at the end of the day. But there's a lot of processes that go into putting together a piece of legislation, and one misplaced comma or period or letter or something or a clause can be detrimental for all concerned and really change the entire way a bill is interpreted, including at the courts. And so it's a real issue, and it is not the way things should be done. So, with that, the whole legislative approach needs to be addressed, and quite frankly, Republicans have not had a majority in both houses of the legislature since 1930, getting very close to 100 years now, and the Democrats show no signs of being interested in cleaning up some of these processes, and they're not shy about saying these things in New Mexico in the legislature. They very much ram these kinds of policies through, and it's really just kind of Republicans trying to not be steamrolled by the entire legislative process as it exists.
Well, and Paul, when you have the numbers necessary to get things passed, that doesn't mean that questions and debate aren't healthy. But I have a feeling that the a lot of times the D's make the calculation that they're not going to come out on the long end of the stick politically by letting the Republicans ask questions and debate issues. They're like, we're going to do this. We don't want to ask. We don't want you to ask questions because we don't even want to talk about it, even whether they're good points, bad points, or not. And that's where we are right now. So uh, this is a question, and this is not a suggestion. Maybe they ought to go to Texas and hang out there, not have a quorum, and have the state police have to go get them. That seems to be what Dems have done in the past when they don't like how they're being treated. But the Republicans, don't have a lot of tools to put up fights politically in the legislature, as it appears, anyway.
Yeah, so let's talk about what actually happened, and we'll start with some of the specific provisions. $161 million spending bill that's contained in HB1. There were other extraneous spending bills, but nothing nearly on the scope of HB1. And this is annual spending. This is money that, unless something changes in Washington, which uh, as long as President Trump is in the White House, I think it's not going to change in this regard on some of these issues. I don't think Republicans are going to have a change of heart and say, "Oh, we want to fund NPR and PBS." It just that issue has been, and to be honest, Republicans are on the right side of that issue. Government media outlets should not exist in a free country. And NPR and PBS should be weaned off of government dollars, whether that's federal or state. But now New Mexico, in its infinite wisdom and ability to enact bad policy, the legislature appropriated $5.6 million to NPR and PBS, with an additional $430,000 for tribal and Pueblo public TV and radio stations, $45.9 million relating to food stamps, and essentially filling in the gaps of what the big, beautiful bill eliminated, essentially trying to overcome work requirements and limits on food stamps for illegal immigrants and certain people who could be in the workforce who are not in the workforce. And, there's obviously no requirements that people who can pay for their own food have to work till 65. In fact, some wealthy people do not. But the idea that you should be retired or out of the workforce before 65 and then go on food stamps, I think that is a very logical way to do things. But in New Mexico, we passed 45, nearly $46 million to eliminate that way of the big, beautiful bill impacting New Mexico. So New Mexico tax dollars will now fill in the gap. $17.3 million to subsidize healthcare premiums under the Obamacare exchanges, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. And then various and sundry other provisions, $7.9 million for regulation and licensing department for a budget deficit issue. Wally, you'll like this one, $450,000 for what's called the CAMP program for college-bound migrant and seasonal farm workers. So essentially really getting into now we're actively recruiting illegal immigrants. Presumably, I'm not saying none of these folks are legal, but this seems like a direct attempt to bring in more folks who are of dubious legal status, and a few other millions of dollars, 50 million from the general fund for the Rural Healthcare Delivery Fund, $3 million for. They didn't call it out, so unfortunately, I don't think we can legally go after it. But Planned Parenthood uh, is really, you can earmark things without actually earmarking to the organization. But the organization in question is clearly Planned Parenthood, $3 million for them. So uh, it's clear that this was a very partisan special session. We knew it all along. It was an unnecessary special session. Some of these spending provisions or elimination provisions will not take effect immediately. There's obviously a government shutdown right now relating to all of this, specifically the Obamacare issue. But Wally, before we dive into that, I want to give you a chance to talk about these specific issues that the legislature passed.
Yeah, Paul, and it just struck me as why? Why did they even need this special session? The amounts involved weren't that long. The timing was not that immediate. And, I think politically, I don't think it really did anything for anyone on the Democratic side to do this special session. It just pointed out that, I think they would have been better off continuing to hand-wring about how bad the Trump administration was in abusing New Mexico, because when they put pencil to paper and came up with what it took to undo all of these horrible draconian things that they've been screaming about nationally at the state of New Mexico, didn't wasn't that big of a deal. It's like, hey, I was just looking at all this as all of this combined with a little bit better business environment over a couple of years, it could outdo the impact of all of this by 10 times or 100 times over relatively easily. So, again, you know, uh, my heart goes out to the few and the proud that absolutely cannot work and are disabled, and all of that in terms of needing to rely on these federal benefits, but to try to make those that can do some work to get these benefits, and to call that hard-hearted, that just doesn't seem to pass muster. And when I looked at these bills in total, I think that that kind of feeling for me is pretty much confirmed, because where was the big celebration? Oh my goodness, we did all these wonderful things. It's like it was a yawner, I think, across both sides of the political spectrum here in New Mexico.
Well, uh, you know, the idea of the free market and embracing business development and a better business climate, that all implies that that fits in with the goals of the Democratic Party of New Mexico. Their goal is to keep more people on government welfare programs and to use those programs as a stick and a carrot, both to get folks who rely on those programs to vote in a certain way and keep voting in a certain way that has really held in New Mexico for the better part of 100 years. So you enact free market policies, eliminate the personal income tax, and voila, people are no longer so dependent on government for their daily bread, and they might not vote the same way.
Yeah, that is interesting. And so, there for a while during a few years back, you couldn't talk about the great replacement theory. That was illegal to do. You would be canceled if you do that. But there are certainly a lot of elements about that. And back in the founding of the country, the idea that once the populace gets the idea that they can pass themselves a pay raise, your country might be in a little bit of trouble. And given the state of the national debt and ongoing deficits, that certainly looks like that's the case here in the United States.
Yeah. Uh, so, related to this, of course, what New Mexico just did with its essentially propping up the exchanges is directly related to the situation in Washington, D.C. Now, Republicans have their talking points, which is that Democrats are trying to restore funding for illegal immigrants. I'm not saying that's a incorrect talking point, but what I'm actually saying is that uh, this is all relating to Obamacare and its manifest flaws. It is a law that we knew at the time would be a failure. Boy, if I had a nickel for every time I said "I told you so" in my work, I would pretty well for myself because Obamacare is one of those laws that we and many others, to be frank, said at the time that it was not going to make healthcare more affordable. The Affordable Care Act moniker was deeply misaligned and misstated. So this law has been in effect for 15 years. Now, what happened that is causing the federal shutdown primarily is that in 2021, uh, there was a expansion of the income levels that can apply for or receive subsidies from the federal taxpayer to prop up the exchange program. Obamacare, in reality, expanded healthcare access, quote unquote, by doing two things. One is it expanded Medicaid to higher income levels and people who are healthy and should be, quite frankly, able to work. And the other was it created this exchange mechanism, which was essentially a model of funneling subsidies to certain people, again, at higher income levels, even than Medicaid, up to that magical 400% of the federal poverty limit. And then the Obamacare, well, in 21, the legislation, I believe, was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, but I don't remember exactly what bill. But this was deemed a temporary means of keeping people insured through the COVID pandemic. Well, the big, beautiful bill said, all right, we're not in COVID anymore. It's time to eliminate this subsidy program for higher income folks. And it passed. Obviously, the Democrats didn't like it very much. And now we are in a shutdown because they won't pass what's called a clean CR or continuing resolution in order to keep the government open. They believe this is a winning issue for them. Uh, and obviously, Republicans have seized upon the illegal immigration aspect and benefits for them, which is an issue. It's not an unreasonable issue to talk about, but we like to talk about the systemic aspect. And this is ultimately a failure of a deeply flawed piece of legislation. And they just want to keep those subsidies going because they can hide the real costs from the end user. And that's exactly what New Mexico did in the special session with that 17 point whatever $3 million. That is going to be a number that, if this is not changed in Washington, and I think we can agree that it's not going to be turned on its head in the Trump administration. Obviously, a future president could go in and just keep the benefits flowing. But for the time being, this is going to be an annual situation here in New Mexico, and that's where things stand. So it's an expensive way to cover for deeply flawed federal law.
Yeah, no question, Pauline. It was one of those things. Obamacare was touted for its higher efficiency, lower costs. We're going to create these insurance exchanges. We're going to have competition in insurance. And, that part of it just basically has fallen flat on its face. It's basically in New Mexico for sure, but largely around the country. Growth in Medicaid is really the biggest impact of what Obamacare was. And then any quote unquote insurance that's provided for those that can't get insurance otherwise is having to be dramatically subsidized because all of these lower cost, higher efficiency promises just turned out to just not work. They just plain old did not work. And is that a
Well, not
surprise?
only did they not work, but they really weren't designed to work
Well,
because
yeah, but we intended them to work, Paul. That's the key. They were intended to work. They were never up to the task, though. Totally agree with that.
Obamacare was a classic piece of legislation passed in the style of a lot of what we do here in New Mexico, and it's not. I'm not going to sit here and say that.
You have to pass the bill to see what's in the
Well,
bill.
that's part of it, but it is taking an issue that is real and not actually addressing the serious problems that are creating the issue, which is a healthcare system that is far too expensive, and a doctor, system or medical provider system that is too constrictive, and ultimately a third-party payer system that does not empower patients. It instead empowers both the government and health insurance companies in ways that should not be done. It is the fundamental flaw of American healthcare going back to World War II and the wage and price controls and the idea of giving people insurance through their employer rather than day-to-day healthcare expenses being paid for by the individual. And then if you can't, if you get hit by a bus, if you come down with cancer, that's where insurance and risk pooling and all the aspects of insurance that we are supposed to do, that all is done. But we essentially have created this third-party payer system that really destroys the incentive to be efficient in your healthcare. And government, as bad as the insurance companies have been, the government is way worse at it all.
Yeah, and then Paul, there are elements of insurance, and there are people that there are insurance companies that are involved. But if you looked at the totality of the system, it's like a lot of things that the federal government calls insurance. Flood insurance, for example. It's like the premiums paid in aggregate do not pay for the system. It's a system that runs on massive government subsidization.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, there's just enough elements in there. And it was it was a Rube Goldberg sort of system they put in place. And for it to not work is certainly not a surprise to anyone who has followed any kind of benefits of a free market program as opposed to a government bureaucratically formed one. But here we are. So now, I guess, what can we say? We're still maybe better than the healthcare system in Great Britain and better than the one in Canada, but we are certainly struggling, again, not only with the cost, but with the efficiency and effectiveness of healthcare in the United States. And, was it bad before Obamacare? Absolutely. Was it better after? Boy, that would be a tough one to say yes to.
Well, government tends to only get involved in some of these economic systems because uh, there's powerful lobbyists with specific industries or advocacy organizations, and they want to keep their meal ticket going. And again, the insurance companies, they certainly have their flaws, but uh, they should be a peripheral player in healthcare, not a dominant player. And of course, governments and the whole idea of government taking on the role of uh, payer of last resort, or in many cases, first resort in healthcare, is clearly not an effective way to do things. And at this point in time, Americans, I don't think we would be willing to go down the same kind of third payer system as you see in Britain or Canada. Americans have become, one of the issues with the medical provider shortage is that is a way that they do on the regular in Canada and Britain when they don't have enough medical professionals or equipment or whatever. You're standing in line, literally or figuratively, for some kind of treatment, and it's simply not available. And
Yeah,
That's
and
where,
it's not explicit rationing, but it
right.
has every bit as much effectiveness as if you were to say we're having a rationing program for healthcare. So
Yes, effectiveness in the sense that
it
you're,
rations healthcare,
yes,
no question
it
about it.
reduces the amount the government has to shell out for this particular welfare program, and that's what it ultimately becomes. All right, little, not maybe not closer to home, certainly is closer to home, but uh, we're getting ready with the first kind of foray into early voting, where you can go down to the clerk's office in this fall's election. And we're not going to really talk about the mayor's race or city council or some of those issues. We are going to talk about the big APS bond that is on local ballots here in the Albuquerque area. $350 million for various district projects. And of course, worth noting that these bonds, as all bonds are supposed to be used for infrastructure and buildings. This is this is property taxes that are paying off these bonds, which are debt. And APS wants $350 million for all of their different priorities. And Channel 4 KOB has a few of them listed in a recent story. I posted a link to that at airsofenchantment.com. There's, a lot of things that aren't terrible ideas, such as going to refrigerated air in a number of schools, a special ed center across the river onto the west side. There's one in the northeast side of things. Enhanced security. These are all defensible on their face, but like we do, we dig into the numbers a little bit deeper, and then you realize, holy cow, APS needs to vastly address the right size itself in terms of its number of buildings and amount of money spent on infrastructure. For example, APS has lost more than 20,000 students since 2016, going from approximately 85,336 in FY16 to 64,995 in FY25. That's about a 25% drop in your student population. And because
That
of
that is
that is mind
that
blowing.
is
Yeah. That is a
mind-boggling.
lot of kids
That
in
is
10
a
years.
ton of kids.
And because of massive spending growth in Santa Fe and the decline in the per student population, because I know this is elemental to a lot of folks, but math is both about the numerator and the denominator when it comes to how much you are spending per pupil. And the last numbers we had were $35,384 per student. Now, the APS school board, and we like many of the members of the APS school board, but this is a group of elected officials who are not likely to jump on the landmine easily of shutting down large numbers of schools, because we need to do this because the numbers are not coming back. There is no flood of young people looking to move to New Mexico to reverse this decline. If some demographer out there was predicting in 5 years, yeah, we're going to see a massive uptick in the number of kids moving to New Mexico, we would say something differently. But that is not likely to happen, and nobody believes that is likely to happen. So why are we likely, if they pass this, why are we pouring money into refrigerated air for buildings that probably shouldn't even be, that are probably half full and shouldn't be still in the APS portfolio? Why can't they sell some of those off at some point and use that money not only for the housing crisis, which is a realistic thing, but also to use for future spending on some of these critical infrastructure issues? And some of it is important stuff like safety at some of these schools. But I want to give you a chance to talk about that number and the situation at APS.
Yeah, well, uh, again, mind-boggling that it's down, basically almost a quarter, and then of all the government programs that are tough to shut down, closing schools is right up there.
It
And so,
is.
to your point, is that there's probably a need for a lot less schools. Some could be consolidated, but boy, people come out of the woodwork when that happens. And again, to your point, that's not an easy thing to address. But when you keep spending more and more money on a system that's not working well, and then to really highlight your point, the way New Mexico is structured right now is our best and brightest students go ahead and go to college. A lot of them go to college in the state, and then they all leave. And so it's not like we're even managing to maintain a good flow in terms of keeping our well-educated students that come out of our colleges and universities, keep them in New Mexico in businesses. They go elsewhere, and again, much less people moving to New Mexico in large numbers. So yeah, I think they are certainly optimize their system for a future that does not look likely to occur. And so, how can this happen? Paul, I've said many times, when the economics of the state is divorced from most of the business activities of the state, and you have oil and gas dumping in money at the top, they're not forced to face any of the issues that could address, the business climate, keep more people in the state, growing businesses, and having businesses start up here and stay here. They're just not doing any of that. And this is just another piece of the puzzle, as it were, with regard to just New Mexico stagnating in almost every way except oil and gas industry.
Yeah, and that's why this really is an important issue for the local electorate here, because the unfortunate reality is that parents and those who are working in some of these schools are unlikely to vote to eliminate or not have this bond. It is up to the taxpayers of the state to say, or the district to say, APS, setting aside performance issues and the costs of construction and whether all of these projects are really absolutely necessary, there needs to be a restructuring, a real look at how we spend all of this infrastructure money and whether all of the buildings and everything that APS has in place is absolutely necessary. And I think this, people talk about the administration at APS, and I'm not saying that we're not overspending on administration at Albuquerque's public schools, but I will say that the reason we get such a large number in terms of expenditures is a combination of the fact that APS has way too many buildings in the first place, and it continues to build more. And part of this bond is for a couple of additional spending, big facilities. So adding to that footprint, and the fact that it's really costly that we have various labor rules and Davis-Bacon requirements, et cetera, green building codes, so-called LEED certification, also increases the price of these buildings. And everybody should go to school in a good building, and we've recommended in the past, not too far into the past, I'll just say like first week of August, yes, we need good quality cooling units on our schools, but we also need to be reasonable in terms of the school calendar and maybe not send kids to school in the first week when it is going to be, as it was, 100 degrees out. There's a big difference in this state between low 90s and 100 degrees, and uh, there's just a lot of common sense that is lacking. And so we're going to put up an effort. We're going to push back against this thing. These tend not to be rejected, and voters tend to overwhelmingly just say, "Yeah, we're going to support this bond for whatever reason." And I think there's a lack of education and a lack of willingness to say no anytime these bonds come up. But I think it's really critical that APS evaluate this. Again, this is not something that is going to turn the other direction for, I think we're going to say, a generation. We're talking 20 years, unless some magical thing happens. And COVID wasn't it. Despite social distancing from other people and bars and restaurants, whether that was going to help or not, there was no baby boom after COVID. In fact, I would say that it probably created a further decline in the birth rate. So, and certainly in New Mexico, it did, because people left New Mexico with their children because of the very harsh lockdowns and restrictions and the school closures, et cetera. So, something not COVID specific, but I just don't see what magical thing happens to boost birth rates dramatically in Albuquerque or New Mexico in general.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Paul. And Paul, I am not. I don't want to be frivolous about the amount, $350 million. But at the end of the day, you know what? Get education attainment better. You know what I mean? It's like this is we the spending aside, it's like, you know what, if this would be the impetus needed to put the programs in place and get our students reading at grade level and being able to do math. It's one of those, even if it wasn't needed, I'd be, who cares? But we are at a place where education, we're last. We're last in education as the state of New Mexico. And there's not a whole lot of talk about how are we going to improve that. So we get to have build more buildings, maybe more than we need, spend a lot more money than a lot of other places. But at the end of the day, I'm back to, it's the mission of the schools to educate our students, and not enough of them are receiving the education that they really need to be as successful in life, much less for the state of New Mexico to be successful in the future.
Yeah. Now, just to be clear, even if you think APS is doing a bang up job, or you think that maybe APS has righted the ship and is moving in a right direction, and I don't necessarily share that view, but I'm not saying it's totally out of the question. It is simply unnecessary for these buildings to be, this bond to be built or to be passed. There's too many ways that we can and should be improving the governance of APS, and the massive physical footprint that this district has. It is simply unnecessary. Moving on, there is a really interesting, and it's rare that we talk about, maybe not lighthearted, but this is a more entertaining story than often we discuss. A UNM, or New Mexico, not UNM, a New Mexico resident of 40 years named Joseph DeGanji took out a group of billboards to be placed around the city of Albuquerque during the balloon fiesta, which is currently going on. And these billboards highlight things that we highlight on a regular basis. As people come and see the blue skies and and hopefully not have their car stolen or their balloons stolen or God knows what else stolen, because that's of course a common theme in Albuquerque. But on the note of regular rankings, one of the billboards says NM national rankings in big red letters: lowest in education, highest crime and drug use. Why can't we do better? And I think this is great. I am going to reach out to Mr. DeGanji and see if he will come on the show and talk about this. It's great to see somebody investing their own resources and highlighting the manifest failure of the political classes in New Mexico and the legislature, the governor in particular. But of course, it's not just them. Also, APS and other entities bear a lot of the blame, and just a really, I think, courageous stance taken by this individual. This is based on a KRQE story, and I urge people to check that out.
Yes, Paul, and the Albuquerque can do a pretty good job of cleaning itself up for the balloon fiesta, and this is this makes me smile. This person basically putting his own money to speak the truth at a time when we would just as soon not talk about any of this from a tourism point of view is interesting indeed.
Yeah. So, you know, we've got a lot of folks. There's been a lot going on in our city and our state, and we'll we've got a lot of guests lined up into the future on this show. But I can assure you that we will work to get this individual on and talk about what he is trying to do. Sounds like somebody very much in tune and aligned with the Rio Grande Foundation. And on another happier note, maybe not such a humorous or frivolous note, but not that that is, but a news story came out. Governor announces $1 billion fusion research and manufacturing campus in New Mexico. That is something where we're going to see research from a company called Pacific Fusion, and they want to engage in research and ultimately perhaps manufacturing relating to fusion technology. Now, fission is splitting atoms. Fusion is what the sun does, which is combining atoms. Both of them have obvious energy generation potential. Fission, of course, was the technology inherent in the nuclear bombs that were developed at Los Alamos and ultimately tested at White Sands Missile Range near Alamogordo. Fusion, it has not been used, to my knowledge, in civilian energy generation sources, and this is a bit of a not outlier, but it's definitely cutting edge technology. I mean, there's been a lot of people researching things like small modular reactors and other forms of nuclear energy involving fission, but fusion definitely has potential. It's got a heck of a lot more potential to provide, zero carbon electricity generation for New Mexicans and Americans and ultimately the world. But, we're kind of at a beginning point in the fact that these folks have $1 billion that they're ready to invest and bring to New Mexico. It's better than Maxion. It's better than Ebon. It's better than so much of the economic so-called development that this governor and this state has done in the last several years. We'll see how it goes, but you know, it's not as bad. I mean, we can quibble on the subsidies and the IRB and the property tax or lack thereof, as well as the other incentives. But setting that aside just momentarily, at least this technology has a real path to, I think, being a revolutionary and very pro economic, pro environment form of energy generation.
Yes, Paul, and if private investment is the primary source of funding for this, I'm like all for it. Fusion in the United States and worldwide has a long and distinguished history of wonderful press releases and no accomplishment, back to the 60s and 70s, and we will see. I don't think they're using lasers. I think they're using magnetic pulses, which those that I talked to about fusion and Paul, yes, there really are people I talk to about this. Unfortunately,
Sure.
they seem to think this might be a little bit better opportunity to make some progress, in a reasonable amount of time. Let's call that 50 years or so or less, and it could be or less. The laser part of it is continually been a big letdown. But yeah, if they invest a lot of money, this would be a fantastic kind of a technical operation for the city to be conducting. And again, if it's private money, that is fantastic that that's the situation.
Yeah, and you can go online and look for various articles about the potential and challenge of fusion energy. I do find it very interesting that uh, the governor did not choose to include nuclear in the Energy Transition Act list of fuels that were considered green or zero carbon. That's, I think, a point of contention with the Energy Transition Act. And to be realistic and actually going to zero carbon uh, electricity generation in New Mexico, you're going to have to do some nuclear. Fusion's not going to be ready for that immediately, but maybe 10 years, 20 years, who knows? Of course, I'm sure it has all of and probably more of the baggage of nuclear fission that we've seen because uh, our governor also worked, as did unfortunately Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, to push back against the location of a spent fuel facility down in southeast New Mexico. The Holtec facility that was under discussion and remains kind of out there, and we'll see where that whole process goes with that. But uh, not surprisingly, the governor's mixed record and, dare I say, hypocrisy on nuclear is unsurprising. She's welcoming a fusion company, not because fusion is somehow just much safer or whatever, but because these people have money, they want to be in proximity to the national labs, which are still doing a lot of research on this. And a lot of knowledgeable people come out of those labs and can be brought into this particular company, et cetera. So there's a lot of good reasons for this particular entity to want to be located right here in New Mexico. So it is, it's better than a lot of what we've seen, but I'm not expecting to be I don't know. Didn't the Marty McFly and Back to the Future, wasn't that a fusion based element in the car, if I'm not mistaken?
I believe it was. So
So
so that worked.
that's
So this,
probably the most exposure most
yeah,
people, aside from just walking out and seeing the sun, which is of course a fusion based situation as well.
fusion-based power.
Yeah, so this is going to be a long term proposition. But anyway, there we go. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.